A gavel slammed down so hard the table cracked. Laughter rolled through the crowd. A cow limped into the ring, missing one back leg, stumbling on three, blood still crusted on the wound, flies gathering at the stump. Men shook their heads and turned away, muttering that the animal should have been put down already. Then a wheelchair rolled straight up to the front, wheels squeaking against the dirt floor. A small hand shot into the air. Gasps. Whispers. Someone snorted. The auctioneer leaned forward, smirking, waiting for the joke to end. It didn't. The hand stayed up, steady, not shaking at all. A girl. 10 years old. Her name was Maddie, and she just bought a cow nobody else wanted, for a price that made grown men laugh out loud. What she saw in that broken animal, nobody else could see. 5 years later, not one of them was laughing anymore. Stay with me on this one. The wheelchair bumped over the gravel lot outside the auction barn, wheels catching on loose stones. Behind her, men were still laughing, slapping each other on the back like they'd just watched the funniest thing all year. Maddie didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the truck ramp her grandfather had built onto the back of his old trailer, and she rolled straight for it like she hadn't heard a word of it. She'd counted the money 3 times before she got in that ring. 2 years of eggs. Door to door, every Saturday, rain or heat, her chair loaded with cartons balanced on her lap, knocking on doors up and down the county road. Some folks bought a dozen out of pity. She didn't care why. Money was money, and she'd stacked it in a coffee can under her bed until it added up to exactly what she needed and not a penny more. Now that money belonged to a cow with 3 legs. Maddie had been in that chair since she was 6 years old. A tractor rolled where it shouldn't have, and that was the end of her walking. She didn't remember much of it anymore, just flashes, the sound of her grandfather screaming her name, the smell of diesel. What she did remember was waking up in a hospital bed and being told her legs weren't going to work the same way again. Ever. She didn't cry about it. Not that anyone saw, anyway. She lived with her grandfather on a farm that had seen better decades. 40 acres, most of it hay ground, a barn with a roof that leaked in 3 places, a house with floors that creaked louder than the wind outside. Her parents were gone, her mother years back, her father not long after, and it had just been the 2 of them ever since, her and her grandfather, working around each other like 2 gears that had learned to fit. She did her chores from the chair. Nobody helped her figure out how. She built it herself, piece by piece, trial and error. A pulley system to lift feed buckets so she didn't need to stand. A lowered latch on the chicken coop she could reach without stretching. A modified rake with a longer handle she wedged between her knees and the chair frame. She'd scraped her knuckles more times than she could count getting those systems right, but she got them right, and now she moved through her chores faster than most kids twice her size. Her grandfather always said she had more stubborn in her than the whole county combined. He didn't say it like a compliment most days. He said it tired, worn down, like a man who'd spent his whole life bracing for the next thing to go wrong. That's what he was doing right now, standing at the back of the trailer, watching the cow get walked up the ramp by the barn hand who couldn't stop shaking his head. Maddie. His voice came out low. Controlled. The kind of controlled that meant he was about 2 seconds from not being controlled at all. We are behind on the feed bill. We are behind on the vet bill for March. We are 3 months behind on the loan for that tractor sitting broke in the shed. And you just spent every dollar you've saved for 2 years on an animal that cannot walk. She can walk, Maddie said. She's walking right now. She's stumbling. That is not the same thing. The cow reached the top of the ramp and stood there swaying, favoring the stump where her back leg should have been. Flies circled the wound. It hadn't been cleaned in what looked like days. Her grandfather rubbed a hand down his face. We can't feed an animal that's never going to produce a calf that survives, that's never going to carry weight, that's never going to be worth a single dollar back. You understand that. Tell me you understand that. I understand it. Then why? Maddie didn't answer right away. She watched the cow instead, the way its ribs moved with each breath, the way its eyes stayed open even though every other part of its body looked ready to give up. Take her back, her grandfather said. I'll talk to the auctioneer. Maybe we get half your money returned. Maybe not, but we try. No. Maddie. I said no. She wheeled herself closer to the trailer, close enough to reach up and rest her hand flat against the cow's side. The animal flinched, then went still under her palm. Her name's Trudy. Her grandfather stared at her a long moment, the kind of stare that carried more fear in it than anger, though it wore anger's face. Then he turned and walked toward the house without another word, boots kicking up dust the whole way. Maddie stayed by the trailer until the sun started dropping behind the tree line, one hand on Trudy's side, feeling her breathe. That first night, Maddie didn't sleep in her bed. She wheeled herself out to the barn after supper, a bucket of warm water balanced on her lap, an old towel and a tin of sal from under the kitchen sink tucked beside it. Her grandfather watched her go and didn't stop her. He just stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, jaw tight, and let her wheel past him into the dark. Trudy stood in the corner stall on 3 legs, weight shifted awkward, head low. The stump where her back leg used to be was crusted and swollen, dark around the edges in a way Maddie didn't like. Flies had found it already. She'd seen enough sick animals on this farm to know infection when it was looking her in the face. She rolled the chair right up beside the cow, set the brake, and got to work. She rinsed the wound first, slow, careful, talking low the whole time the way her grandfather used to talk to spooked horses. Trudy flinched but didn't bolt. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe 3 legs didn't leave much room for bolting. Either way, she stood there and let a 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair clean out a wound that would have made a grown vet wince. The salve stung. Trudy's whole body shuddered. Maddie kept her hand pressed flat against the cow's flank, steady, until the shaking stopped. You're gonna make it, she said. I already decided that. Nobody believed her. Not that night, and not in the weeks that followed. Word travels fast in a small county, faster than it has any right to. By the following Saturday, everybody at the feed store had heard about the crippled girl and her 3-legged cow. Maddie rolled in for a bag of mineral supplement and felt every head turn. There she is, someone said, not quiet about it. The girl that bought the circus act. Laughter. Not cruel exactly, more the kind of laughter that didn't think it needed to be cruel because the joke seemed so obvious. A crippled girl buying a crippled cow. What did she think was going to happen? Hollis Rourke was there too, leaning against the counter in his good boots, the kind of man who owned more land than he worked and always seemed to know which way the wind was blowing before it blew. He didn't laugh. He just looked at Maddie with something colder than amusement. That's not a farm animal, he said, loud enough for the whole store to hear. That's a stunt. And stunts don't pay bills. He looked past her toward the door, like he was already picturing her grandfather's fields under a different name. I give that place a year. Maybe less. Maddie didn't say anything back. She paid for the mineral supplement and wheeled herself out, chin up, and didn't let her face show a thing until she was back in the truck. But Trudy wasn't getting better. That was the part that scared her more than anything Hollis Rourke could say in a feed store. The wound turned worse before it turned anything else. Heat radiating off the stump. Trudy stopped eating right, stood swaying longer than she stood steady, and one morning Maddie found her lying flat in the stall, breathing shallow, unable to get back up on her own. The vet came out that afternoon. He was an older man, gentle enough, but he didn't dress up bad news for anybody, not even a 10-year-old in a wheelchair. Infection's deep, he said, pressing careful fingers around the stump while Trudy groaned. I can give you something for it, but I'm not going to lie to you. This might not turn around. And even if it does, she may never carry real weight on that leg configuration. 3 legs isn't nothing, but the balance, the muscle strain on the others. It's a lot to ask of an animal. What's the medicine cost? He told her. It wasn't a number a grown man would have flinched at on a good farm with a good year behind it. It was a number that made her grandfather go quiet and still in a way that scared her more than shouting ever could. We don't have it, he said finally. Not without pulling from the loan payment. And if we miss that payment again? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Maddie wheeled herself to her room that night and pulled a small wooden box out from under her bed. Inside was a bracelet, thin silver, a little scratched from years of being handled and put away and handled again. It had been her mother's. One of the only things left that had actually touched her mother's skin. She looked at it a long time. The next morning, she had her grandfather drive her into town, to the little shop that bought and sold things like this. She didn't ask him to talk her out of it. She didn't give him the chance. She wheeled up to the counter herself, set the bracelet down, and asked what he'd give her for it. Her grandfather stood behind her the whole time, silent, and when the man behind the counter counted out the bills into her hand, he didn't say a word either. Not until they were back in the truck. That was your mother's, he said. I know what it was. He didn't argue with her after that. He just drove them straight to the vet's office and paid for the medicine himself, on top of what she'd earned, and didn't mention the loan payment again that week. The medicine worked. Slowly, but it worked. The swelling went down. The fever broke. Within 2 weeks, Trudy was standing on her own again, wobbly but upright, eating from the trough Maddie had rigged low enough to reach from the chair. By the time the leaves started turning that fall, Trudy was steady. Balanced in a way nobody had predicted, weight shifted natural onto the 3 legs like her body had simply decided this was how it would be done now. The season turned mild. Hay came in better than expected. The bills, for once, stopped stacking faster than they could be paid. On a cool evening in October, Maddie sat on the porch beside her grandfather, both of them quiet, watching Trudy graze steady in the near pasture, the sun going down easy behind the tree line. Her grandfather had a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. For the first time in months, it felt like the worst of it might actually be behind them. A truck rolled up the drive that nobody recognized, county seal on the door, and a man in a tan uniform stepped out with a clipboard tucked under his arm. Maddie's grandfather set his coffee down on the porch rail and stood up slow. Help you, he said. Looking for the owner of this property. Got a complaint filed. The man flipped a page on his clipboard without looking up yet. Anonymous. Says there's an unfit animal being kept alive here. Suffering is the word used. Kept alive for, and I'm reading this exact, a child's game. The porch went quiet in a different way than it had all evening. Maddie's grandfather's jaw tightened. There's no unfit animal on this farm. That's what I'm here to determine, sir. The inspector finally looked up, glanced toward the pasture where Trudy stood grazing, steady on her 3 legs, calm as anything. His eyebrows went up just slightly, like he hadn't expected the animal in question to look like that. That the cow? That's Trudy, Maddie said, wheeling herself to the top of the porch steps. She's not suffering. The inspector studied her a moment. 10 years old, chair, steady eyes. He didn't say anything smart about it, which was more than most grown men in this county had managed. I've got to file a report either way, he said. Whoever made this complaint, they've got the county's attention now. There's a process. I need to look at the animal, look at records if you've got any, and then it goes to the board. County Livestock Board decides from there. If they find neglect, they can order the animal seized. Sometimes euthanized on the spot, if it's bad enough. Her grandfather's face went pale under the sunburn. Seized. Over a rumor. Over a complaint, sir. I don't write the rules. He clicked his pen. There's also the matter of a citation. Animal neglect, if it's founded, carries a fine. Repeat findings carry worse. That word sat heavy in the air. Neglect. 2 weeks ago this had been men laughing in a feed store. Now it was a man with a badge talking about seizure and citations and a county board that could take Trudy away with a vote nobody in this house would get to cast. Maddie didn't wait for her grandfather to answer. She wheeled herself down the ramp built onto the porch steps, the same kind of ramp he'd built onto the trailer years back, and rolled straight toward the barn. I've got records, she said. Come look. Inside, taped to the wall by Trudy's stall, was a chart Maddie had kept since the first infected night. Dates. Feeding times. Weight estimates, guessed by eye and by a length of rope she used to measure girth every week, written down and compared month over month. Notes on the wound, when it closed, when the swelling stopped, when Trudy started putting weight evenly onto the stump side. A drawing, crude but careful, of the sling she'd built to help the cow stand during the worst of it, with measurements written along the edges. The inspector stood in front of that wall a long time, flipping through pages Maddie had torn from an old-school notebook, held together with a bent paperclip. You wrote all this, he said. Not really a question. Every day. He looked over at Trudy, who lifted her head from the feed trough and watched him back, unbothered, chewing slow. No swaying. No favoring the leg that wasn't there anymore in the way an animal in pain would favor it. Just a cow eating supper like any other cow on any other farm. This is. He stopped, cleared his throat, started again. This is more thorough than most full-time ranch hands keep. I'll be honest with you. Does that mean she's safe? Maddie asked. It means your case looks a whole lot stronger than the complaint made it sound. He clicked his pen shut and tucked the clipboard under his arm. I'm going to write up exactly what I saw here today. The records, the animal's condition, all of it. But I want to be straight with you, both of you. He looked at her grandfather now too. My report isn't the final word. It goes to the county board. They'll set a hearing. They'll decide. I can tell them what I think. I can't decide it for them. He left without another word, his truck kicking up the same dust that had followed Maddie's grandfather to the house on auction day. If you've made it this far, you already know this girl doesn't quit easy. Hit that subscribe button, because what happens at that hearing is the reason this whole story got told. It didn't take long to find out who'd filed the complaint. Small counties don't keep secrets well, and the woman at the clerk's office let it slip to Maddie's grandfather without much prodding, that the paperwork had come in with Hollis Rourke's name signed clean at the bottom, no attempt to hide it at all. Her grandfather stood in the kitchen that night with the phone still in his hand, staring at nothing. He's not worried about the cow, he said. Never was. Then what's he worried about? Maddie asked. The land. He set the phone down slow, like it weighed more than it should. If we lose this farm to fines, to seizure, to the county coming down on us. He's been wanting these 40 acres for 3 years now. Man like Rourke doesn't need a cow to be cruel over. He just needs an excuse. Maddie sat with that a long moment, watching her grandfather's hands, how they'd started shaking just slightly, the way they hadn't shaken back at the auction barn, back when this had only been about a cow nobody wanted. This wasn't about a cow anymore. It hadn't been for a while now. It was about whether a girl in a wheelchair and an old man behind on his loan would still have a home come spring, and whether anybody in that county boardroom would care enough to stop a man like Hollis Rourke from getting exactly what he wanted. The hearing was set for the second Tuesday of November, 7 in the evening, at the county building on Main Street. Word got around fast, same as it always did in this county, and by the time Maddie's grandfather pulled the trailer up outside, the parking lot was already half full. Inside, the meeting room was packed tighter than Maddie had ever seen it. Folding chairs lined wall to wall. Standing room only in the back. She recognized half the faces from the feed store, from the auction barn, from 5 years of small-town gossip that never seemed to run out of fuel. Some of them had laughed at her once. Some of them were about to watch her prove them wrong. Her grandfather wheeled her chair up the ramp at the side entrance, but once they got inside, he stepped back and let her take the wheels herself. She rolled down the center aisle alone, past rows of people who went quiet as she passed, all the way to the front table where 3 board members sat waiting, papers stacked neat in front of them. No adult spoke for her. That had been her decision, and her grandfather had respected it, even though she could see it cost him something to sit down in that front row and let her go up there by herself. Behind her, at the side door, a farmhand led Trudy in on a lead rope, the cow's hooves clicking steady against the tile floor. Gasps went through the room, quieter this time, more surprise than mockery. Trudy wore a harness across her hindquarters, leather and canvas, stitched and adjusted by hand, built to shift her weight evenly across the stump side and keep her balanced without strain. Maddie had built it herself over 2 winters, taking it apart and rebuilding it a dozen times until it fit right. It didn't look like anything from a catalog. It looked like exactly what it was. Something made by someone who refused to let an animal fall. Trudy walked to the center of the room and stood there, calm, chewing at nothing, ears flicking at the crowd like they were no more interesting than flies. The board chairman cleared his throat and opened the file. "We're here regarding a complaint of animal neglect and suffering, filed against the property of," he checked the paper, "the Hargrove Farm. County Inspector's report is on file, along with the original complaint." He looked up. "Is the complainant present?" Hollis Rourke stood from the second row, buttoning his jacket like he was about to give a speech he'd rehearsed all week. "I am. And I'll say plainly what half this room already knows. That animal never should have survived the year it was bought. Keeping it alive this long isn't kindness. It's neglect dressed up as sentiment. A cow with 1 leg, kept for years past what any reasonable rancher would allow, also a child could play at farming. This isn't about pity for the girl. It's about the animal's welfare, and about a property that's clearly being run without proper oversight." A few heads nodded in the crowd. Old habits. Old jokes, dressed up serious for a courtroom. Maddie wheeled herself forward until she was even with the front table, close enough that the board couldn't look past her even if they wanted to. "Her name is Trudy," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "She's not suffering. She hasn't been suffering in almost 5 years. I've got the records to prove it, and you can look at her yourself, right now, standing in front of you." She held up the folder her grandfather had helped her copy from the original notebook pages, now typed clean, dated, organized month by month. Weight gains. Feeding schedules. Vet visits, only 2 in 5 years, both routine. A photograph of the harness she'd built, with measurements written along the margins, and beside it, a photograph of Trudy taken last spring, standing in the pasture, calm, sturdy, unremarkable except for the leg that wasn't there. "She's had 2 calves," Maddie said. "Both born healthy. Both sold for full market price. She's not a stunt. She's the reason this farm made it through the last 2 winters." The chairman took the folder, flipped through it slow, the same way the inspector had flipped through it back at the barn. He passed it to the woman beside him, who studied the harness photograph a long moment before looking up at Trudy standing steady in the middle of the room, unbothered by the eyes on her. "Mr. Rourke," the chairman said, not looking up yet. "You've stated your concern is the animal's welfare. Can you explain why your complaint was filed anonymously, and why, according to county land records, you've made 2 separate offers on the Hargrove property in the last 18 months, both declined?" The room went very still. Rourke's jaw worked for a second before anything came out. That has nothing to do with this. It has quite a lot to do with this, the chairman said. If the complaint was filed to pressure a family off their land rather than out of genuine concern for the animal standing right in front of us, looking, from where I sit, in considerably better condition than most livestock I've inspected this year. Laughter started somewhere in the back of the room. Not at Maddie this time. Rourke's face went red, and he sat back down without another word, jacket still buttoned, speech unfinished. The board didn't take long to deliberate. 10 minutes, maybe less. When the chairman came back, he didn't waste time with formalities. Complaint is dismissed. No neglect found. This board would like to formally commend the care documented here, and frankly, the girl who provided it. The room that had laughed at her 5 years ago in a dirt floor auction ring sat completely silent now, every eye on a 10-year-old in a wheelchair with a folder in her lap and a 3-legged cow standing steady beside her, breathing easy, not a flicker of suffering anywhere in her body. Nobody was laughing. Not one person in that room. The parking lot outside the county building emptied slow that night, trucks pulling away one by one, headlights sweeping across gravel that still had Trudy's hoofprints pressed into it. Maddie's grandfather didn't say much on the drive home. He didn't need to. Every few minutes he'd glance over at her in the passenger seat, like he was still trying to believe what he'd just watched his granddaughter do. Hollis Rourke didn't stay in the county long after that. Word got around, same as it always did, that his offers on other properties started drying up too. Nobody wants to sell land to a man caught trying to steal it through a courtroom instead of a checkbook. He sold off most of his own acreage within 2 years and moved out of the county entirely. Nobody missed him. The farm didn't turn around overnight. Nothing that starts with a cracked gavel and a laughing crowd turns around overnight. But it turned. Trudy's first calf came the spring after the hearing, healthy, 4 legs, steady on its feet within an hour of being born. Maddie cried when she saw it stand. Her grandfather pretended he didn't notice her crying, and she pretended she didn't notice him wiping his own eyes on his sleeve. That calf sold for full price. So did the next one. And the one after that. 5 years is a long time on a small farm. Long enough for a roof to get patched properly instead of tarped over every winter. Long enough for a loan to get paid down instead of rolled over. Long enough for a coffee can under a bed to stop being where the family kept its hope, because the hope had moved into the barn instead, standing on 3 legs, breathing easy, calm as anything. Maddie was 15 now. Still in the chair. Still building things nobody taught her to build, because nobody else on that farm knew how to build them for her. The pulley system for the feed buckets had been replaced twice, each version better than the last. The lowered latches, the modified tools, all of it had grown up alongside her, same as the farm had. She ran the breeding side of things now, mostly on her own. 6 cows in the herd, all of them descended from Trudy, all of them healthy, none of them missing a single leg, though every one of them had that same steady, unbothered way of standing that Trudy had. Maybe that was just good breeding. Maybe it was something else, something that got passed down that had nothing to do with blood at all. The farm had a name now, a small sign at the end of the drive that hadn't been there 5 years back. People from 2 counties over came to buy stock from the Hargrove place, because word had gotten around that the girl in the wheelchair ran the tightest breeding operation in the region, and that her records were cleaner than anything the state inspectors usually saw. She still had the bracelet. She'd bought it back herself, a year after she sold it, walking into that same shop with money she'd earned selling calves instead of eggs. The man behind the counter remembered her. He didn't charge her a penny more than what he'd paid, though he could have. She wore it most days now, thin and scratched, a little more worn than it used to be, same as everything else that mattered. She kept the gavel handle too. The one that cracked the day she bought Trudy, snapped clean off during the auctioneer's slam and left behind in the dirt of the ring. She'd picked it up that same afternoon, tucked it into her chair's side pocket without really thinking about why. It sat on a shelf in her room now, next to the folder of records that had once sat in front of a county board, next to a photograph of the harness she'd built with her own hands over 2 long winters. Sometimes people asked her why she kept a broken piece of wood on her shelf like it meant something. She never had a long answer for that. She'd just say it reminded her what people thought of her once, and what they thought didn't turn out to matter as much as she'd let it feel that day. On a cool evening that fall, 5 years and 1 season past the day a fist of a hand went up in a dirt floor ring, Maddie sat on the porch beside her grandfather, same spot they'd sat the night the inspector's truck rolled up the drive. Trudy grazed in the near pasture, older now, moving slower but steady, 3 legs doing the work of 4 the same way they'd learned 2 years ago. Behind her, the young ones grazed too, unbothered, ordinary, healthy. Her grandfather had coffee going cold in his hand again. Some things didn't change. You know, he said, after a long quiet, I told you to take her back. I know. Wasn't my finest piece of advice. Maddie almost laughed. No. It wasn't. He didn't say sorry, not exactly. He wasn't a man built for that kind of word. But he reached over and rested a hand on the wheel of her chair, just for a second, the same way she'd once rested her hand on Trudy's side that first night in the barn, steady, quiet, enough. The sun dropped easy behind the tree line, same as it always did, and out in the pasture, a cow that nobody else in the county had wanted stood calm in the fading light, surrounded by everything she'd made possible, breathing slow, not going anywhere at all.